this movie experience, in my opinion, for me, this is a great movie that has a ton of flaws. If you're wondering what I mean by that, well, if you just look at it and the amount of entertainment that you can get from this movie, you're going to love this movie. But if you go a bit deeper, you're going to be like, and that's the same with a lot of Disney movies this day. So, this was easily my most anticipated movie of 2019. I was so pumped for this movie. I was watching every TV spot and trailer that I saw. Maybe that's only like one. I don't know. Yeah, anyway, and I was so pumped for this movie, and after the reviews came out, I had a low expectation. And my relationship with this movie has been like kind of love-hate. There really is an exact moment where I grasp, and that's my opinion on this movie, because it changes all the time. But this is, what I'm about to give you right now, is what I think of the ideas in this movie that have been presented in this movie. Because I find that even if at some days I love this movie, it still means that there are flaws in this movie, which means that I can't love it. Or I still can't if the flaws don't bother me. Sadly, the flaws in this movie are kind of apparent. First off, this movie sadly feels like the setup from The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi kind of just diminished. Because yes, The Force Awakens was set up, it had some intriguing thoughts. Now The Last Jedi was about survival, it wasn't about blowing anything up, so it was also set up. Here, it's trying to pay off everything in a nice, epic way. But the way they did it at the first few, like even in the title call, it's like, oh, okay, new stuff is happening. Well, sadly, it could at times feel like a retcon of the other movies. There's a ton of exposition at the start that could cause a lesson in the amount of intrigue in the movie. Like the fact that, oh no, this might not work. Sure, there's a teeny bit of that, but not the most. This is partially due to when there could be character building. Sadly, we get interrupted by, gotta go! And also because just they run into some people who give them some useful exposition. Sure, that's a problem when you have a total retcon or sadly don't take the setup from the first two or just the previous installments into consideration for the final one. Another thing with this movie had quite a few fake deaths. Like the few fake outs that I find were unnecessary, you could take out of the movie. And it would make the pacing a bit better, and you can explore the characters a bit more, especially involving Chewbacca, who fake dies. Turns out he's not dead, so now they have to rescue him. I felt like that whole plot line didn't have to be in the movie. It felt kind of like a side quest that could extend the movie, except that I find that this movie still was a bit overstuffed. Also, I find that a lot of the side characters, sadly, didn't exactly contribute the most, sadly. They didn't exactly have a clear want and need, so it's hard for them to have the building blocks to create a cohesive and compelling character. Even sadly the main character, because sadly there wasn't exactly that sense that Rey was suffering. I find that this in secret could be Kylo Ren's story, because I find Kylo Ren was a consistency. Kylo Ren did suffer. We could feel for Kylo Ren. Kylo Ren is probably the most conflicted of them, and it makes sense. Rey, sadly, our main character, didn't suffer the most, so we couldn't be on her side. Also, at times, you could tell in this movie that there were ideas that were set up, but then were kind of ignored, so that now they have to try to finish them. So it could feel like the whole arc, or the whole middle part, the important part of the building blocks was missing at times, which could feel a bit anticlimactic at times, and it could make the whole trilogy as a whole sadly feel even more messy, sadly, and some of the ideas just felt weird because they weren't exactly explored the most. So I wasn't the biggest fan of that. Also, the plot was heavily involved around, you have to find this, but to get that, you have to get this, but to get that, you have to get this. I sadly didn't exactly understand why they chose that. Sure, it makes sense that the bad guys wouldn't want anyone to come near them, but still, in the sake of the movie, it just makes the pacing even more fast and less time to explore characters. And when there could be, well, that gotta go, so I wasn't the biggest fan of that. Especially since at the start of the movie, there is a few plot conveniences, especially involving one of these things that they have to find that they conveniently find. I wasn't the biggest fan of that. It's involved some sort of thing called sinking fields. It's the Star Wars version of quicksand. I wasn't the biggest fan of that. And also the fact that, well, the biggest of them all is the fact that Palpatine is really powerful, even at the start of the movie. Like, he could raise, like, according to General Pride, who's a new character more named later, like, tens of thousands of Star Destroyers. What I don't get is, if he's so powerful, how does he not rule the universe yet? Sure, maybe he needs his fleet, but just by himself, he could probably take over the universe. So that's what I don't get. Also, one thing that I noticed in this movie is some of the lines were kind of rushed of dialogue, or important lines of dialogue that could be meaningful for characters were kind of rushed. They didn't make the most sense. Like, there's this line where Kylo Ren was like, I offered you my hand once. You wanted to take it. Why didn't you? And Rey says, you wanted to kill me. What? Or you would have killed me or something like that. I was like, what? What? I didn't understand that exactly. Partially because of the fact that I don't think that was the reasoning and didn't exactly have the most reasoning behind it. Because when there could be these character building moments, well, gotta go get the next thing. So I wasn't the biggest fan of that. Also, there's something about the fact that Rey's acting, well, all the acting in this movie is good. But I find that she whispered a lot in this movie. She's like, God, kill me. It's kind of like, can't you would have killed me. I don't know, is it just me or just mild weird with the sound? It's nothing to do with the acting, but it's something about the sound. I can't exactly figure out what. Still, the acting is pretty good in this movie, in my opinion. Some of the big moments in this movie, I feel like didn't exactly have a lot of lead up. I didn't exactly understand the moral of Ben's turn. I liked the relationship between Kylo Ren and Rey. I mean, their internal relationship. I just didn't feel like we needed that kiss at the end. I feel like there wasn't enough lead up for that to make it impactful, or even Kylo Ren's turn to the light side. I feel like we could have explored the characters more, but sadly this movie had to finish everything, so I wasn't the biggest fan of that as well. Also, there wasn't much explanation, sadly the most amount of explanation about Palpatine's return, which is a bit off if you think about it, because it could be the center of this whole story. Or they could explore it more to make it more on this movie side. Be like, oh, okay, that makes sense. I was always confused why they didn't exactly explain that. So I also wasn't the biggest fan of that. Sadly, this movie also isn't the most original. There is Death Stars. There's Palpatine. It could feel like Return of the Jedi at times. Which is very unfortunate. Again, if the whole story is sadly a bit mild due to Palpatine, it also makes it even harder for this movie to tell its own cohesive and compelling story with compelling characters, and the fact that sadly, Rey as a character, see, I didn't feel like she had the moment of suffering, like that big moment of suffering. Sure, they tried to shoehorn a bit in there, but that type of suffering you could tell wouldn't lead to Rey turning to the dark side. Just because that if she uses Force Lightning to kill Chewbacca, that's reason for her to never join the dark side. So her temptation to the dark side isn't an internal conflict, but it's her actions conflict. What? I wasn't the biggest fan of that. Also, that Rey sadly didn't exactly change or anything changed her. She did have a want. I think most of the characters have a want, but they didn't have a need. So it was also hard for us to sadly appreciate the fate of these characters, because some of these impactful moments, sadly, I wasn't the biggest fan of, because we didn't learn the most about these characters. I find this movie was more about spectacles, sadly, or the nostalgia rather than the characters or the plot of its own. Sadly, I was not the biggest fan of that. Also, this movie at times, even though it is a retcon, sure, there are still some characters that were in, like, The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi. Here, there was an idea that Hux could be a spy, which was an interesting idea, pretty interesting. It got to show how everyone was a human, but since The Last Jedi made Hux, or the Force Order, sadly not the most intimidating, now, his arc is kind of diminished immediately, so some of the big ideas could kind of be diminished just because some ideas that some people didn't like in The Last Jedi, which was present a lot in this movie, especially when Luke catches Rey's lightsaber. Well, I was actually fine with that because Luke did have an arc, but still, I felt like it still at times could be a bit of a jab at The Last Jedi. A movie that I still enjoy. Also, well, another thing, there's this scene that I guess was supposed to look cool where Chewie and Poe and Finn were running through a hallway in a Star Destroyer, killing everyone, going pew 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 pew. First of all, that unhumanizes Finn and his care of Stormtroopers, which sadly wasn't the biggest fan. Finn seems to sadly love the idea of killing Stormtroopers in this movie, which I didn't find do the most justice to his arc. Also, the fact that there isn't the sense of intrigue or tension, just because, first of all, The Last Jedi made them sadly a bit not intimidating. Still, Stormtroopers are made for a bit of comedy. There's this scene with C-3PO's toying with some Stormtroopers, and when Rey is using this comedic Jedi mind trick on these Stormtroopers, so sadly there isn't the most intrigue. Also, that they're hitting and just killing all these Stormtroopers. There isn't that sense of doom. You're like, ah! Which can also muddle the movie a bit as well, which I wasn't the biggest fan of, sadly. One of the biggest plot holes that I have with the exact start of the movie is Palpatine announcing that he's back. I never exactly understood that. Why exactly? Don't get that, sadly. Also, I find that most of the Dark Rey setup was found in this movie, which I find weird, especially since all of a sudden she's getting all these voices and visions of her on the Dark Throne that sadly wasn't exactly most explored in The Last Jedi, The Force Awakens, which could also make the trilogy as a whole feel even more muddled and kind of messy, sadly, which I wasn't the biggest fan of. The other problem that I have with Rey sadly not suffering is she kind of was bit OP. Sure, they did try to offer reasons for her to be okay, I guess that can make sense. Sadly, here it didn't exactly work. The most partially because you didn't get to see this suffering, so it could feel hard to make this character humanized, and since there's a big time jump of Rey training, you could also feel like you're missing some of the most crucial parts of the arc. Sadly, I wasn't the biggest fan of the movie, and I'll give Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker, a C-. And yes, I didn't give it an F or anything, just because if you don't look deep and just look at the entertainment value, this movie is really good. But if you look deeper, sadly, there's a bit too much in this movie. Remember, that's just my opinion. My opinion isn't the right opinion, it's just my opinion. Please click like and subscribe if you want more videos like this. Thanks, bye, see you later.